Hello everyone, this is Destro, and welcome back to Realm of the Lich King. I decided to expand my Clone Wars starter box into 2 full armies for Star Wars Legion. In order to get them done as fast as possible, I turned to Slapchop. When you want to get a bunch of miniatures table ready really quickly, this is the way. So first up are some B2 battle droids, because I already assembled enough B1s to last me a lifetime. And let's get something out of the way right at the beginning. Ordinary Slapchop is just drybrush or zenithal, and then put some contrast paint over top. I do go a little bit beyond that here, because I like to be a little bit extra, and the few extra highlights and things that I throw on there don't really take all that much time. Of all the things that I paint in this video though, the B2s are the closest to an actual Slapchop. Simple metallic drybrush, blue contrast over that, some black for some of the areas to add a little variation, the weapons, the cabling and conduits and things. The 2 squad leaders got blue on their heads so I can pick them out in a crowd, and all of the weapons, and then a little sort of light restraining bolt thing I think it is on the front of them got a dot of red, both to pick them out and so that they meet a 3 color minimum requirement. That really is it for the B2s though. It's a simple scheme, just blue metallic, but it works out. It's a striking scheme for them. And you're going to have a fair number of these guys kicking around, so they don't need to be anything too special. Now, standard size for a game Star Wars Legion is 800 points, and I needed more for the CIS side than just a couple of units of B2 battle droids, so I also grabbed some Magna Guards, mostly just because I think they look cool. And these guys proved to be a little bit of a challenge. Their cloaks were simple enough to dry brush. These guys are a study in contrasts. They have dark metallics and dark colored armor plates set against the light pale tan of the cloaks. The guards are pretty spindly droids, and maneuvering the brush around behind the cloak to get some paint on every part of them that needed it without getting any onto the cloak was the hardest part of painting these. Incidentally, the leaders have these pistols, and I decided to paint those brass so they wouldn't look like they were part of the hand. But with the base coats done, it was time to move on to the transparent paints that would be doing the majority of the heavy lifting here. 1 coat of skeleton horde contrast for the cloaks, and then black ink for everything else. One of the best things you can do when trying to paint quickly is to minimize the number of steps you have to do. In order to do that, you can minimize the number of paints you're going to use. Using black to shade both metallic colors in the armor let me be a little bit lazy with my brush control too. Now, one more thing that I would like to talk about with the Magna Guards is in regards to the going above and beyond on the Slapchop thing. See, strictly speaking, I could have just dry brushed these little energy things on the staff, but they're a focal point. When we look at a miniature for the first time, our eyes are naturally going to be drawn to focal points, mostly the face and any weapons, things that grab our attention. So if you want to get the most bang for your painting time buck, focus your efforts on the face and the weapons. That's where the eye is going to be drawn. You might as well spend the extra effort there to make those parts of the model look better. In this case, dotting in the eyes with red was sufficient, but the Magna Guards are carrying these big impressive electro staves, and I wanted those to look cool. Magenta is a really eye-grabbing color, and unfortunately I didn't have magenta ink and had to go with violet, but it worked out in the end. Painting these in an extra attention-grabbing, super bright color only reinforces that that's where the eye is going to be drawn. And so doing a couple of extra rounds of highlights on these, lightening up the magenta with some pink even, yeah, it took a little bit of extra time, but in the end, the overall effect is worth it. It wasn't all that hard to do, and the extra contrast on those energy arcs really helps to sell the effect. That's it for the droids though, so onto a character model. I already had a commander in General Grievous, and I decided not to get a second one in Count Dooku. Instead, I went for one of the operatives, and opted for Cad Bane. Cad Bane was introduced in the Clone Wars TV show, so confession time, I don't know that much about him. But I do know he's got a sweet hat. For some reason his sprue includes a hatless head option. I'm not sure why. Does anyone use that? I'm not a psychopath, so I built him with his hat. Now, most of Cad's outfit is leather, and painting leather all in one color would be boring. So, after an all-over dry brush of deck tan, I set to work proving why brown is the color that I own the most different versions of. I'm not even joking. Green's my favorite color, and I got 12 of those. I have 13 different browns. 3 of them are contrasts, and I used all 3 of them on Cad. I used Gore Gruntifer for his shirt and belt, Snakebite leather for the jacket as well as his hat, and I used wild wood for the gloves, straps, bag, and a few other small details. I didn't even do any extra highlighting on the coat and leather things. The dry brush and the contrast paints over top actually worked well enough by themselves that I could just leave them alone after that. Now I realize that doing that is in fact the point of Slapchop, but I could have pushed the highlights a little bit further if I wanted to, but I liked the look of it well enough that I didn't have to. Fabrics, furs, feathers, and other heavily textured surfaces are the best surfaces to use this technique on, so Cad actually turned out to be a pretty good choice from that respect. Now I don't own any of Army Painter's metallic speed paints, so I had to kind of do metallics the traditional way and just start with a metallic and then put some ink over top. But they don't call it liquid talent for nothing, and it actually works perfectly fine that way. I took the opportunity to do Cad's pants at the same time. I decided they should just be black. I didn't have any other good color ideas to use for them, so I took my own advice, for those of you keeping notes, and minimized another step. Which means that if you don't count the metallic base coat, Cad Bane is actually 100% Slapchop. Or almost. There was one thing on him that I decided to paint a little more traditionally, and it was, once again, the face. Cad is a Duros, who are a species of blue-skinned aliens, and while I do have a blue quickshade that would have worked decently well as a contrast, sort of style transparent paint to do over a dry brush for the face, I wanted a little bit more vibrancy, and for that I went with some traditional paints as my base coat. I could have simply used the shade over that and called it a day, but I did want to go a little bit higher with the highlights, once again bring some of that vibrancy back in, and make the face a better focal point. Cad did, however, do me a solid by being a Duros because they do just have red eyes, so painting those was nice and easy. A little bit of vermilion, wham bam done. And all of a sudden I've got a fully functional droid army. But what about the clones? Need to expand them too, right? I got a set of the Phase 2 clones to differentiate from the Phase 1s that were in the starter box, and gave them and the ARC troopers that I also picked up an all-over heavy dry brush of white. White being the primary color on the clones, I also started them off with a lighter gray shade of primer. In fact, all of the Republic minis got a lighter gray shade of primer, except for Anakin, who we will come to later. The ARC troopers have a lot more detail than the standard clones, as well as coming with a couple of helmetless heads to represent some special characters. The clones in the movies are all played by Tamura Morrison, an actor from New Zealand whose name I really hope I didn't butcher. In any case, he's Maori, and I didn't want the miniatures to read as Caucasian, so I mixed a little bit of black-green ink into the Crusader skin speed paint that I was using in order to give them more of a darker skin tone. This was an experiment that turned out a lot better than I had actually expected it to, and I think it would be possible to get a pretty wide range of skin tones just using a basic skin tone speed paint and mixing in different colors of ink. Speaking of inks, while I did use the black contrast paint that I have for the guns the clones are all carrying, for their visors I wanted something that was a little more fluid and would flow better into the recesses of the helmet, and for that I went with black ink. And just like with the starter box that I painted earlier, I took advantage of the fact that orange paint is pretty transparent to begin with, and just painted straight orange over the dry brushed shoulder pads and knee pads and other details and things that I wanted to have the unit's color. I didn't use orange for all of them though. The ARC Troopers box comes with those two special characters I mentioned, intended to represent Fives and Echo, and they're canonically in blue. Plus, you know, it wouldn't be a Realm of the Lich King video without a little bit of freehand somewhere, so I had a quick go at painting some freehand unit markings on those two miniatures. Clone Troopers remain stupidly easy to paint and come together really fast, even for the ARC Troopers with all of their little extra gubbins and doodads and things. That, combined with the fact that the Republic side of the army is intended to usually be played by my wife, meant that I decided to put a little bit of extra effort into the two character models that I'd purchased to round out the Republic army. I ended up with Padme Amidala and Anakin, as I've already mentioned. Now, just like the clones, Padme is wearing predominantly white, so she started off with a white dry brush as well, and then I used Skeleton Horde contrast for her boots and cape and things. The cape takes contrast paint beautifully in particular. The heavily textured surface is a great canvas to work with these types of paints on. Of all the miniatures in this video, Padme is probably the one that I least slap-chopped. Her face and hair both got proper base coats, and while I did do just contrast paint over the dry brush for the first step of painting her, basically everything got another round of highlights after I had done that. I came back in with deck tan for the boots, belt, and a nice dry brush of that for the cape, and then used regular white for her clothing. It's kind of nerve-wracking to paint a miniature that's predominantly white, because if you mess anything up, it will show up, so I was pretty careful with my brush control while I was painting Padme. Sometimes you really do need to go slow to go fast. And even after I had put contrast on the face and hair, once again I did come back in with some highlights, tidy that up, add a little more definition, just make the whole face and hair and head a little bit cleaner, a little bit more nice looking to use as a focal point for the miniature. You definitely don't have to do this, it's perfectly fine to leave it as it is. And while I think I've lost the footage for it somewhere, I even painted the eyes. If speed was the only factor, I would not have painted the eyes. So that's Padme down, and brush control notwithstanding, I've probably saved the most complicated miniature for last. It's the Lord of Sand himself, Anakin Skywalker. Now, Anakin's tunic is dark, but it's not quite black. It's sort of a warm red-brown type of black. And I wanted to reflect that, and I figured the best way to do that was to do my basic dry brush using red. So I did 2 dry brushes, one carmine red and one carmine red remixed with some white for the tunic and the boots. The pants I just painted straight brown, I believe it was mahogany brown, and I used the same color to paint Anakin's hair. I wanted his glove to be a different shade of black again, lots of color variations in the black. Even when you're playing around with neutral colors, you can use different base coats, different glazes, different things like that to really add a lot of visual interest to your neutrals. Different materials will of course look different in the normal world, and even if you're painting a miniature all one color, unless it's also all the same material, it shouldn't look like it's all one color. That's what I've done here. I used the red dry brush and black contrast paint to paint the tunic, and I used dark sea blue paint for the glove with black ink over top it later when I did the metallics. The metallics are another thing I seem to have lost the footage for, by the way, so sorry about that, but there really aren't all of that many of them on Anakin. It's basically just the lightsaber hilt and the buckles on his glove. I had fun while I was painting Anakin, working out how to do the red, brown, and whatnot, and as a result, I kinda couldn't really put him down. He was the miniature that I most came back to, adding more little highlights, a little extra definition here, working on the face, putting some highlights on the pants. Just little things, little details. I kept coming back for more, and I probably shouldn't have. It wasn't really in the spirit of slap chopping everything, but I wanted to add those extra little highlights, and hey, got me some mileage out of my bottle of pale sand. Now let's take a second to talk about lightsabers. Lightsabers, the way I've done them for this, are pretty easy. Off-white for the base coat, cover over with an ink color of choice, and then pick a direction and do another thin line of the off-white color that you used for your base, down, kind of sketchy down the middle where people are going to see it. Without adding a bunch of fancy OSL and everything, this is a pretty easy way to do lightsabers. It was the second last thing to do on Anakin. The last thing was his scar over his eye, which I painted in with some ink real quick. It's sculpted on the mini and I wanted it to be there. And as we move into the shots of the finished minis, I'd like to say thank you for being here. Now, these aren't fully finished. Obviously, there are a few things we have left to do. I obviously didn't base them. I used the same jungle basing scheme that I used in the original video, and I'll just link that. You can go check that out if you want to see how I did my bases, but you could do yours any way you wanted. These miniatures, they paint up pretty fast, and it's not too hard to do a whole bunch of them in one go. I had 14 clones, 18 droids, and 3 characters, and it didn't really take all that long to get them all painted and onto the table. Hopefully I've inspired you to do the same with some of your unpainted miniatures. Playing with painted miniatures is objectively 35% more fun, at least, and you can quote me on that. I'm sorry this one took me so long to get out. I'm really hoping to get back to doing more videos this year, and I hope that you'll be along for the ride. Until then, I've been Destro, you've been great, and I'll see you next time.